When I bought my first piece of property, I was 23 years old. I had been in business for a couple years in a thing called Sharp Auto Body. I was on the way to the closing, and I went to my attorney's office, and him and I rode to the closing together. His name was Mitch. He could tell I was like a cat on a hot tin roof. I was nervous as the day was long. And Mitch asked me, he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Well, Mitch," I said, "to be honest with you," I said, "I'm a little scared." And he said, "Of what?" I said, "Well, I'm putting everything into this deal." And literally when I tell you I was putting everything into it, I was putting everything into it. At 23, I didn't have credit. I didn't have good credit or bad credit. At that point, I'd paid for everything in the business with cash out of my checking account. But as fate would have it, I'd volunteered in the Lions Club, and I knew the president of the bank. So I got a deal, I got a loan, but he leaned everything. And when I say he leaned everything, I mean everything. He leaned my tools, he leaned my silverware, my car, my motorcycle. He leaned everything with the exception of my clothes. And so I told Mitch, I said, "Look, if this thing doesn't work out, I'm going to lose everything." And Mitch said, "I'd like to share some advice with you that my dad gave me." I said, "Sure." Mitch said, "My dad told me a long time ago that whenever you have an opportunity, and there's risk in all opportunity, you need to figure out what's the worst possible end scenario. And if you can survive that worst possible scenario, then take the risk." So Mitch turned to me and said, "Louie, how old are you?" I said, "I'm 23. He said, "Are you married?" I said, "No." He said, "Do you have kids to support?" I said, "No." He said, "So if this whole thing fails and they come and take everything, would you have someplace to live?" I said, "Yeah, I know some people." "Could you go get another job?" "Yes." "Could you start over?" "Yes." And then he said this, which changed my life. He said, "So you can survive the worst possible case scenario, then take the risk." And I can tell you, I took that risk. Was it a little nerve-wracking? You betcha. Have there been some challenges over the years? You betcha. But I can tell you, my life is completely different because I took that risk. So figure out if you can survive the worst case scenario, take the risk.